GR1, you need to clear waves of enemies before they break through and overrun your team. And up to stage 18, it's pretty much a straight DPS check. But once you hit 19 plus, the boss starts healing them, and suddenly it's harder to kill them fast enough. And at that point, knowing what roles you actually need to bring onto your team can be the difference between getting stuck and getting through. Hi there, and welcome to the channel. I'm Slate, and today I'm going to teach you how to build a team that beats GR1 stage 19 to 21. If we have a look at the quick mechanics of GR1, it is quite straightforward. You have to have these waves of enemies, beat them before they beat the wall, over on your team, but there is this Forsaken totem that happens, and it creates a healing pool by the boss. And because this happens quite a lot, you have to kind of consider the entire team structure, because it is not just about DPS anymore. It's about bringing in other roles that make sure that A, you can support, because these mobs with the circles around them do a lot of AoE damage to your team, and you're going to need to bring in something that deals with the healing that the boss puts out. Now, the mechanics are the same between 19 and 24, but today we're going to focus on 19 to 21 as it's more about the roles, and 22 to 24 is way more about optimizing those builds and stat checks and gear checks, and synergy between your heroes. So we will look at that in a different video. So what we're going to do first is break down the 5 key roles that you are going to need and how you can build that around your roster. Before we even think about damage and DPS, one of the really core important things is going to be ult cycling, getting your ultimates off as much as possible. And that is why you are going to need some sort of rage regen. And thankfully, there are some rage regen healers that you can actually bring in so that these will cover both the healing and sustain of your team as well as the rage regeneration. So the 3 healers that we have with rage regen capabilities are going to be the Epic Hollow, the legendary Elowen, and the legendary Earlis. Now, they all have slight tweaks to their kit and how much rage regen they actually put out, as well as what other things that they do. Hollow is really nice because she provides rage when she heals, and because of this, it means you can get a huge amount of rage out on your team. But the downside is that because you want her to be healing a lot, you actually need to build her as a bad healer, and that can make the sustainability a little bit tricky. Elowen is able to apply rage regen to all allies on the battlefield every 3 seconds. It is this buff that also lasts for 3 seconds, so essentially she is restoring 1% rage every second, and this is really lovely. She also is able to cleanse, and her Wood Elf can also provide supplemental healing. She is honestly my favorite, but you know, the other option who is also really, really good is going to be an Earlis, and that is because she has this passive where allies are able to recover additional 1% rage per second. So this is the same as Elowen, but with the Serene Breath, which is one of her healing abilities, it is able to be 2% rage. So she can actually provide a little bit more rage depending on her use, but again, the ranges are slightly different. Now, if you don't have any of those 3, don't worry about it. The other thing that you can bring in, and also to be honest, you could do this anyway, and that is bringing in the wonderful Laurel. Now, what is interesting about Laurel, if you don't know, is that when she dies, surrounding allies are able to get 50% of their rage cap. So essentially what you do is you drop her down, you pick her up, and your allies in the sort of like squares around her will get this 50% rage regen. And that is absolutely fantastic if you're trying to cycle a lot of ults. And you can also pair her with Volker A1 so that she can come back onto the board a bit quicker. But I would say this, if you don't have one of those 3 healers, you can absolutely bring in any other healer, you know, take an Aelin, for example, pair them with Laurel. Or if you want to just go absolutely ham on the ults, you could do your rage regen healer and Laurel cycle as well. Now, the other thing to know is that because of the AoE damage, you may need to bring in a supplemental healer, but ideally that person is going to be bringing in something else to the team. And that leads us on to our second role, and that is going to be anti-heal. Like I said, what makes the jump from 18 to 19 so difficult is the fact that we get this new boss who puts out this Forsaken totem, and that has this big green pool, which is going to heal. Now, you can just straight DPS over it and try and kill the mobs through the healing or around the healing. Burst DPS is an option, but one of the safest options is actually going to be something called anti-healing. Now, in terms of anti-heal units, again, we have a few options. Dracula is not applicable for this because he is single target, but the main ones that we are going to be looking at is going to be Lysair, Artemis, Demi, Uncles, Boreas, and actually there is one other hero who doesn't show up, and that is because it is on his artifact, and that is going to be Zealous. So Zealous is really interesting in the fact that he can be your DPS, but if you have his artifact, that is how it inflicts anti-healing on the affected enemies. And so if this is an option, it's a pretty solid option. But in terms of obviously my favorite, Thunkle's new epic, he is absolutely fantastic. He, I think, puts out some of the best anti-healing. He's got a lovely range, and he can cycle really quickly. So he is a fantastic option. I think Artemis is probably one of the safest options. He can provide supplemental healing to your team to help them keep alive. And then, of course, he can do this anti-heal. Now, if you have him at A1, you can also build him in sort of like a slight damage build as well, which is quite interesting because you only need to build 50% crit rate. So you can really get into that speed and rage with a few different subs, and that can be very straightforward as well. The other two cultist options that we have is the Ancient Lord Demi, who also puts anti-heal out. Now, the only problem with Demi is her range in the fact that she won't go across the entire unit, whereas the other ones will do if you place them here or place them here. Or again, Thunkles is going to go down the bottom here. And that can just make it a little bit tricky, is you're not going to be covering everything, but it's still pretty handy dandy. And she could also be a second anti-heal, because that's the thing. You can, if you want, bring in 2 anti-heal units so that you are making sure that the entire duration of the fight, there's no healing happening. So that is definitely an option that you can have. And of course, we have Lasir. He is similar to Zealous in the fact he is DPS with anti-heal. And of course, Dane, who I do not have on this account, but is another anti-healer. He is a fighter with anti-heal on his ultimate. Then finally, we have Boreas. Now, Boreas is really interesting in the fact that he is able to apply anti-heal when enemies are inflicted with freeze. And so the way that you get the most out of your Boreas is making sure that you pair him with a freeze unit. One of the easiest ones to pair him with that everyone has is going to be the wonderful Galmari. And so, yeah, that is just, if you are finding that your Boreas is not doing enough anti-healing, it might be that there are not enough freezes out on the board. And of course, once you have those 2 roles covered and knowing who those options are for those first 2, you can then decide what DPS you're going to bring in. And the reason I say this is that you are absolutely going to want to make sure that whatever DPS you are running is under a Lord bonus to get those faction bonuses in damage and stats and whatever else it is. And now, obviously, you can bring in any faction that you want, and there are definitely team comps out there that cover it, but I would say the main 3 factions that we're looking at is going to be Watchguard, Cultist, and Esoteric. And this is because of a couple of things. 1, really good AoE damage options. Number 2, having those healers that we talked about, and then also having the anti-heal units in there. And when you are deciding what DPS units you are bringing in, you need to make sure that they have AoE capabilities, not just on their ultimate. I would definitely say you want to make sure that they have AoE on basic as well as ultimate hits. And of course, you can come in here and just go AoE magic attack or AoE physical attack. I will say that typically speaking, you tend to bring in the mages, but you can absolutely bring in AoE physical attack. If you look at what the mobs say, there is no difference between the defense, which is against physical, and the magic resistance, which is against magic. So you're absolutely fine to bring in either of those things. In terms of how many DPS you need to bring into your team, I would say it's somewhere between 3 and 5 units. It's essentially half your team, because remember, out of the 10 units that you can bring into the fight, 2 of those are not allowed on the field. So you have 8 slots. We have our Rage Friend, we have our Anti-Heal, we have 2 more roles that we need to bring in. And so that essentially brings in effectively 4 other units that you can have for DPS. And obviously, if you are mixing roles, like I said, with a Zealous, then that would technically be 5 DPS. So I would sort of say you're looking at around 3 to 4 DPS primary. In terms of what the best options are, if we look at the cultists, they are going to be split into 2. You are either going to be running a summoner team, and that really happens if you've managed to get Ezereth, as he does a huge amount of AoE damage, but he needs to be fed. And so the 2 people really that pair well with him are going to be Elise, who again is a fantastic option in and of herself, and Beatrix, who again is another option. But those as a little squad are absolutely fantastic. If you do not have Ezereth, that's absolutely fine. There are some other really nice cultists that you can bring in, even alongside Felice and Beatrix. They don't need to be running with Ezereth, but if you have an Ezereth, Ezereth needs them, if that makes sense. So the other options that you can have for the cultists, you can bring in a Vienna. She's fantastic. She also has the execute. So if you are struggling with the anti-heal, what you can do is when that Forsaken Totem is about to hit, if you ult with the Vienna, she can execute before the healing comes up. And that can also be a really nice way to get around that healing mechanic. The other options are going to be Rosalia. She has got quite a unique range, but still does really well in this content. Huge AoE damage going on there. You have for the Cultist and the Esoterics, Anora. She's a burst mage, so you really want to make sure that you are timing her ultimate when the anti-heal is up. Magda is a fantastic option because she has a pushback ability, which will help you save some time on the wall. You can bring in a Morrigan if needed. You can bring in a Kriya. They're not ones that I would necessarily recommend, but they are usable. And of course, if you have absolutely no other options, Iona is a pretty solid, at least third or fourth option. I think by the times you get to the 19s to 21s, you do really need some of that legendary oomph. And that is simply because the epics don't scale as well, or they need much higher gear, which you haven't quite got yet if you're trying to break in. Now, in terms of the esoterics, one of the reasons the esoterics are really great is because when we talked about that need to cycle your ults, they typically have a reduced skill cost when they are under a lord, and that means that they're going to be getting their ults back quicker. Now, in terms of options, we have Comet. He is just very straightforward. Like all he does is AoE magic damage. There's nothing fancy about his kit except that, and he does it really well. We've already talked about Boreas as an anti-healer, but he also does a huge amount of damage, and that can be really nice. Again, we spoke about Anora, she's there. And then the other options, obviously Valara, she is just an absolutely broken unit, but she's an ancient exclusive. So if you have her, fantastic. Use her. If you don't worry about needing her to clear this stage. In terms of other fighters, Eris does a lot of damage, although the only downside to him is he is a single lane. And so he'll be able to hold that lane really well, but he's not going to be hitting across the mobs. And that is where someone like a Neja is going to outshine, because he is able to hit all three lanes if you put him in the middle. But if you're using Thunkles in the middle, then you could have Eris one side and you could have Neja on the other, and that would work just as well. There aren't really any other options. We do have a Dahlia, but she is unlimited. And then the final faction, speaking of Neja, is going to be Watchguard. Again, if you are lucky enough to have picked up an Ingrid, she is fantastic. You're going to put her on the front end facing left, and then her AoE is going to happen because it is this long range. That is the only way to make her work in this content. In terms of the other options, again, you have your Talon, you have your Neja. Guan Yu is a recent hero that is definitely viable as well because he does AoE. And then Talon in her ground mode is also an AoE option. If you have her in her platform range, she's going to be single target. And obviously, we also have Dane as an option for DPS in the Watcher factions. And once you've had a look at what your DPS options are and who you are going to bring in, the other thing that you need to look at is something called crowd control or debuffing. And that is because that is a really simple way that you can boost the damage of your team against the mobs, especially if you're running a cultist team where typically the cultists do more damage dealt to enemies inflicted with some kind of CC. It is definitely a really worthwhile thing to bring in a CC unit. Now, in terms of the best CC units, I would say you're basically looking at three options. Is going to be a Bubba, it's going to be a Greed. Where is a Greed? Here he is. And then the final one, I think, is going to be a Mari. Mari I would bring in if you are pairing with a Boreas. Otherwise, for the epic option, I would bring in a Greed. And that is because he is able to just keep cycling his ults, putting out the slows on them. And he also puts out burns, which again is another debuff, which can help. And then Bubba is just fantastic. Beelzebub, if you want his full name, I just refer to him as that, is the fact that he is able to, debuff, put out this AoE damage reduction, which will help your team survive. He is also able to put out the magic vulnerability, which both Greed and Mori do, so not to worry there. But he brings inspiration in your team, which can help. And if he is under a cultist lord, he's going to provide supplemental healing. So all around, he is just a fantastic CC'er that if you are able to bring in a team, it's great. If you don't have him, not a worry. And obviously, inspiration brings us into the other way that you can boost your DPS. and that is via inspiration. Now, the two classic inspiration units are going to be a Dao and a Dolores. If you have a Dao, she is fantastic, especially at A1 because of her extended range. She is going to be able to cover at least 2 of your ground fighters, and that can be incredibly helpful. But if you haven't managed to pick up a Dao, Dolores is a really fantastic option, and that is because she does a huge 40% inspiration. And if you bring in Laurel, you can cycle her up to do that constantly. Now, in terms of other inspiration units, because there are quite a few in the game now, we definitely have been seeing more of them, which is really nice. Constance is able to apply a 35 up to 45% inspiration on her ultimate. We also have a Rivenhold, who I wouldn't necessarily is best for this fight if you have the other options, simply because as a northerner, he's going to be off faction. He is able to just constantly apply a 15% inspiration, which does go up during his ultimate. There are a couple of other heroes, for example, Fercy is able to put out inspiration on his ultimate, but these are much weaker. So yeah, I would say if you have Dao or Dolores, they are your absolute go-tos, and if not, you can use one of these secondary or you can supplement with it. So yeah, those are the 5 roles that you want to make sure that you're bringing into the team. You are going to want a Rage Healer, Anti-Heal, DPS, Inspiration unit, and CC unit. Now, there is one little funky workaround that if you are able to do, it is quite straightforward. And that is if you have a long range fighter, mainly Ardia, although you technically could do this with an Eris or a Valkyra. But in my experience, the only people I've seen successfully do this is with an Ardia, just because of what she is able to put out DPS wise. And that is that you are able to kill the boss before he is ever able to put out any healing. And therefore the rest of the fight is so much more straightforward. So yeah, that is a fun little workaround that if you have a hero like Ardia, you can employ. Now, it's all well and good explaining these roles, but it's really important to show you an actual example of how this works. And you can see here, we have jumped over onto my Light account. This is my stage 19 clear. As you can see, we're doing a bit of a hodgepodge team, and that is completely okay. As you can see, our DPS is going to be Naja, Iona, Eris, Estrid, and Boreas. We do have a Lynx, but she's going to be in there more for a bit of crowd control as supplementary DPS. But again, the freezes that she does are going to complement Boreas. We have Vortex for some extra survivability and healing. And we have Dao because we do not have a Rage Regener here. We could absolutely supplement out Estrid for Laurel, but I'm going to show you how at 19 you can scrape by without the Rage Regen healer. However, I would say that as you get closer to 21, it becomes a lot more important. So anyway, getting into the fight, this is how it is going to go down. So first things first, you're going to put down your DPS, and then you're going to put down your inspiration unit, and you want to make sure your DPS is in the inspiration unit range. I love the fact that I thought it was an A1. Clearly, I've got so used to A1 Dao that I missed that. So obviously, in this situation, if you have A0 Dao, you need to move your measure to the left. And if not, you want to make sure, you know, if it's A1, then that would have hit. Iona is going in that top corner. Now, I will say whoever's in that top corner, you need to make sure that they have some HP, or you need to bring in a big healer like a Vortex to keep them alive, because these little AoE scourges really do hit hard, and that top corner is going to cover it. Boreas is going down. He is going to be bringing in that anti-heal, like I said, and supplementary DPS. He does really good DPS as well. Then it is going to be Estrid. And we can see we are really heavily relying on those fighters, going to be bringing in our Boreas, and then finally our Lynx for the CC and supplementary DPS. And then it's pretty much straightforward in terms of just trying to line up the ults so that we kill these waves as much as possible with the anti-heal up from Boreas, and avoiding the big healing pool that the boss does anyway. And you can see what I was saying about the long range fighter, that Eris is actually hitting the boss at the very top, and we are doing a little bit of damage, but not a huge amount. So that's why, you know, actually you need someone crazy strong like an Ardia if you want to try that strategy. But yeah, the waves are going to keep coming through. And you can see the penetration from Dao is going on Estrid and Iona. Would have been much better if it went on Nesha. I'm really sorry. But hey, we all make mistakes, and it does just sort of go to show you that even if you do mess up a little bit, if you have these key components, it can still make the team work, and it can still give you that very first clear. And yeah, we are going to now get into the very final, like, huge push of these waves of mobs. And I think this is typically where a lot of people struggle. What I would say is if the wall is over 50% by the time that you get to this point, it's okay. You will probably be able to clear it. And then, like I said, the other thing you can do is you can see we do have a tank with Isolde as our Northern Lord. What we could do is if we needed to block something because the wall did come down, you could pick up your Eris or your Estrid, or even you could pick up the links at that point and then put the tank down to block the boss or block an extra minion and give you just a few extra seconds, because sometimes that can be the difference between clear or not clear. But this is going pretty smooth. We've now killed all the mobs. And once you kill all the mobs, the boss won't be able to heal, because he actually heals based on the healing that he does to the mobs, if that makes sense. So even if he heals, you'll notice with this one here, it's going to come up, but he is not going to get any healing on himself because there's no mobs to put the pool out to. And yeah, that is the GR1 19 clear that I did for the very first time. And I think this was like 2 weeks in. It was quite early. I think it was day 16 I did all 3 of them, so I know that this one was a little bit before. And yeah, anyway, we're gonna have a look at the details now. Obviously Neja, big damage, then it's gonna be Eris and Iona, but I think what's gonna be really important here is to show you the gear, because really the gear at this point is not good on anyone's account. You know, like, you are scraping together, and I always preach stats over sets, and so that is really what enabled this to happen. If we come down here and we actually have a look, you'll see that we are running broken, but Neja is in all attack bonus. He has got the best on my account at this point, and a terrible artifact, because yes, artifacts are fantastic, but you probably don't have them if you're trying to push 19 for the very first time, and that's okay. Then we're moving over to Iona, who again is nearly crit capped at 92% and nearly skilled. But she has got one of my first mythic artifacts, and she is in a crit rate bangle. Like I say, if you're going to use a crit rate bangle, you need to make sure that the other 2 are definitely attack bonus. We have Eris, who is crit capped, thankfully, but he is running a double crit damage build, because they were, again, the best pieces of my account. And again, not ideal, but definitely usable. Vortex is just in healing. Same with Doughton. She's not even in a maxed out Keen Wisdom. Those are just random attack pieces that have attack subs. So you can see it's still over 11k. Estrid, again, coming in with the next round of attack bonus. DPS, we are using that lovely deadly aim set that you get and the doom set. Now you can put the doom set all on one hero, and I definitely recommend doing that, because it is a really good carry set until you reach your first like 19. And you can see here I did have to spend some time farming the 18s in order to clear this, but that is completely okay. And Boreas again in a crit rate main, and no one's really skilled. The artifacts aren't there, but it lets you clear the 19. And then once you clear that first 19, just farm it for a while. It starts to get you good gear and resources, and that is how you progress. So yeah, hopefully that helps. And as you can see, if we look at my stage 21 clear, we have definitely improved the lineup. We do now have the Eloin, we can bring in the Laurel, and it definitely makes things a lot more smooth. So yeah, obviously what you use for 19 is going to evolve by the time you clear the 21s. And that is the beauty of the game, is the evolution of your account with the gear and the heroes that you get. But anyway, that is going to be everything from me today. Do like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments below who your MVP was for Gear Raid 1, because I love hearing about the little hidden gems that people find to help them clear content. But anyway, that is all from me today. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video and the next live stream. So until then, take care and bye for now.